Joining me today is Charlene Wang, author of I'll Follow You. Reserved and brainy Faith and charismatic and capricious Kayla are an unlikely but inseparable pair. Creating the successful influencer persona Hannah Primrose feels like a lottery ticket to fame in high school. But when Faith earns admission to elite Harkness College, she's ready to move on. Soon learns it isn't so easy to say goodbye to her past or to Kayla, who sees an opportunity to join her. Grifting her way onto campus, Kayla brings her signature mix of magnetism and volatility right to Faith's dorm room. As each strives to fit in and to stand out, Kayla's motives become murkier, and Faith realizes too late that she's lost control of the narrative. Charlene Wang draws from her own legal career, her time living in Biloxi, that's Biloxi, Mississippi, I assume, her Ivy League experience at Dartmouth, and of course, the power of her own strong friendships. She has a BA from Dartmouth College, a JD from the University of Virginia School of Law, and has worked as a litigator for 6 years. Welcome to the show, Charlene. Nice to have you on.
Hello, excited to be here.
Great to have you. So, all right, you've been described uh, they describe you as you have arrived as a bold and satisfying new voice in fiction. So, okay, so let's talk about that. You are a brave and bold new voice. How'd you do that? Why are
I
they
love that
talking about you in that way? Yeah, let's.
intro. It's certainly not how I would describe myself, but I love it. Yeah, I think, I have a unique background to bring to fiction. I did not go to an MFA. When I was at Dartmouth, I was an English major, but I actually didn't take too many creative writing classes. And really, I came to writing quite late in life. I was already a litigator in New York City for 6 years when I started writing my first draft of this book.
Okay, I have to say, coming from my perspective, that's not late in life, but I just want to clarify that. It's not that late. Yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Late relative to me.
Okay, good. Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't, I didn't take that traditional path of, going to MFA straight out of college. I had a whole different career and I had worked in a different industry before I started writing fiction. And in fact, I actually started writing fiction to help me metabolize some of my experiences as a litigator. And I think that all comes to bear when you're reading my debut.
Okay, when you say metabolizes your experience as a litigator, and as you just said, and I said it too, 6 years as a litigator, what does that mean?
So when I had worked on a very intense first degree murder trial when I was a second year associate, and it was a very intense, long trial. And afterwards, I just didn't really know what to do with myself. I was trying to make sense of that experience. It's actually not a common one among litigators. This was a pro bono case. Most corporate litigators actually don't really even step foot in the courtroom for a very long time. And those experiences really were something that I was trying to understand. And so I wanted to write a novel that fictionalizes that experience.
And
Um,
given that experience, is that because it was a traumatic experience? You're saying it was a different experience because your expectation was as a litigator that wouldn't be an experience that you have. What was the experience? I mean, obviously, it had a huge impact on you.
Well, I think, when you're trying a first degree murder trial, obviously the stakes are very high. And when you're coming on a trial team and you're one of the youngest on the team, it's that you learn a lot. And I think one of the things being a lawyer is that especially if you're a litigator and you're doing criminal defense, you're meeting people on the worst day of their life. And seeing that up close with the legal system and how it really shows, you know, um, really like how like someone's life up close. That was an intense experience for me. And it was not something that I could really talk about with other people. And so and I've always loved reading. I've always loved being able to understand humanity and being able to exercise empathy through books. And so I started taking creative writing classes around the city, and I was trying to, have a record of what I'd had witnessed. And
And do you think, and I want to just step back a little,
yeah.
being, because this has to do, as we get more into the book, your female identity, being young, I mean, inexperienced, all of those things, I assume, came into play in terms of your reaction to this murder trial.
Oh, certainly. Yes. I remember the first time I cross-examined a witness. I had these much older male attorneys come up to me afterwards, and they called me, I think they gave me a nickname. They called me the silent assassin. And I don't know, and I felt like I thought it was a compliment, but it was one of those compliments where there was layers under the
Yeah.
compliment. And I wasn't sure what that meant in terms of how I was being perceived as a young lawyer. And so that's, there was countless examples of that. And I think that's true of any industry, but especially when it's, something as, intense and drawn out as a trial where you're really under a microscope, every single person who participates in a trial. Yeah, it really, it really shaped my view of the world.
So that's a life and death situation all the way around, a murder trial, right? And then you're saying these attorneys who are on your team, and you also say there are layers to their response, but there's a somewhat dismissive quality to it as you're defending this client and putting it in an more than an awkward position. Is that it?
Yes. And I don't want to go into like too many specifics because
Yeah.
I have some ethical obligations having been the lawyer on this case. But yes, I think that when you are, at that age, I was 29. And I present young. And so I think when it's, something, as you said, so, high stakes as a first-degree murder trial, there are certain assumptions that I think a young woman who's a lawyer who's walking to a courtroom about to do her first cross-examination, there are certain assumptions that people make. And whether that's fair or not is, a different matter altogether, but it's certainly something that, you do have to deal with.
Charlene, how do we make a leap, I guess, forward to, yes, then you went back, you decided you wanted to write, you write the novel. How does that relate directly to the novel that you wrote? And I did read a little synopsis about it, but it is about young women and their experiences, um, relationship, identity, friendship. And I don't know if I said this, but also victimhood. It's all part of this narrative. Um, how do those two experience, the experience of the courtroom and the experience of writing the book, connect?
Yeah. So there's a personal journey that I think is one answer. Which is, I wrote this draft fictionalizing my experiences on a first-degree murder trial. And the draft was terrible. I got feedback that it was just way too much, way too factual. And I was having a really hard time just putting aside my identity as a lawyer who is like very attuned to the facts and stepping into the role of being a storyteller. And that draft I had to put in a drawer. And I thought, okay, that is my first book. Lots of writers don't publish their first book. That's okay. I started a 1 year novel generator class and I told myself, I'm going to write a completely different story. Plot twist, this story was actually the first book, but I didn't know it at the time. And I told myself, I'm going to write about two best friends. They are trying to escape this small Mississippi town, and they have very different ways of how to achieve that goal. And Kayla, who is the charming, charismatic one, she wants to become an influencer. She thinks that that's her ticket out of this town. And her best friend Faith is the brainy one who is really good at school, and she secretly applies to Harkness College, which is, it's very similar to, in some ways, Dartmouth. Is like an Ivy League type school. And so I always thought that this was a different book, but by the time I finished writing it, I realized it was the same book because all of my protagonists, what they want was what really I was searching for in this trial, which is recognition, security, power. And so it ended up being the same book. I think if you finish it, I don't want to spoil anything, but if you finish it, in the end, I do think that you will see some of my legal thinking come into play.
Are you Faith? I'm
Oh,
assuming you're not
you know,
Kayla. Yeah.
I get that question a lot, actually.
Yeah.
I actually think in certain friendships I have been Faith, but in other friendships I have been Kayla.
So it's not either or, right? It's not this dichotomy. It's all together, right? That's a good way of,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
so. I think, every relationship is different, and maybe in some relationships you have more space naturally, and in other relationships you're conceding space.
But
And
Charlene, and but this all, it seems to me, has to do with women being able to gain power in different ways. Obviously, with these two characters, you've given examples and they kind of meld into one another emotionally at different times. But it really has to do, I think, with being, I'm assuming, how women are able to be respected, how the all these systems that we're attached to, whether it's the legal system or actually any profession, I would say, how we have to the struggles that we have emotionally and in reality to be able to
yes,
do this, right?
yes, no, absolutely. That's very well put. Um, Yeah, I think one of the arcs that Faith goes through is that she doesn't want to become an influencer because in her mind it's not actually art. And so she goes to this Ivy League school and she's drawn to art conservation because in her mind, art conservation is the opposite of, creating posts and trying to chase likes online. Restoring a painting is tactile, it's physical. The painting is centuries old, whereas she feels the captions she's helping ghostwrite for Kayla's account is ephemeral and somewhat and not authentically art. And I think that, towards the end of the book, she is wondering why she has these assumptions. And, these assumptions are, assumptions that the world is telling her about why is content creation not taken as a legitimate form of storytelling? Or, why are there all these like assumptions undermining it? And so I think that's, it very much is, it's a coming of age story about a girl who wants to, take power. But even when she tries to, there's also a little voice in her head that's like, I'm questioning it. I don't feel like this is legitimate in some way.
Now you were born. You came to the United States when you were 3 years old. You were born in Beijing, right? And then lived in several different cities, but one, Biloxi,
Yes.
which is where the book starts out. So let's talk about your. Well, I'm assuming that at age 3, I don't know how much you remember of that experience. Well, you can tell us.
I don't remember many, I don't have many memories of being in Beijing.
How about in? Oh, yeah, 3 years old. So, or even coming to the United States and all that. Whatever you had to do. But so, what was it like living in? You know what that was like, living in Biloxi, Mississippi, and
Yeah, Um, so Biloxi was the first city I lived in on my own. So I went to college, I went to Dartmouth. And Dartmouth has a unique semester layout where the winter term you can take off. And it's because it's so cold up there. And also I think it's meant to give you a leg up because internships during the winter are less competitive. But really what happens is that if you are well connected, like many students at Dartmouth, like you have a father who, manages a law firm or works at a hedge fund, it's easy to find those like off cycle internships. But if you're not well connected, you kind of have this entire winter term where like you really don't know what you're supposed to do with yourself. Like, are you supposed to go home? Like what are you doing? And so I decided to do AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps is essentially Peace Corps, but it's for domestic. And so I did AmeriCorps and I went to Biloxi and I was restoring homes that were destroyed by Hurricane Katrina. And I really like fell in love with the city. I met someone down there and I ended up going back to Biloxi for almost a year and a half after, my AmeriCorps term was done. And when you're in AmeriCorps, you have a very meager stipend, and it is not very much. You're making less than minimum wage. And so I was supplementing the stipend by working at a sushi restaurant. I was working at a pool hall as a cocktail waitress. I worked at a disability law firm. What happened was I ended up meeting just a really wide range of people through those experiences. And especially when I was working at the pool hall, there were so many women I met there who just stuck with me, who helped me, who were my friends. And a lot of them informed Kayla and informed, the character of Faith too. And so it was a very special time in my life. And, this Biloxi is a city I hold really close to my heart.
Well, it's interesting that you made that choice. I mean, you're a person who, uh, most people, or many people, I should say, even if they don't have connections, they're going to get these, great intern jobs coming from Dartmouth. But you really went the whole route. Like you just decide. I mean, from Dartmouth to Biloxi is like a huge
It
difference,
is.
right?
It is.
And yeah, and you availed yourself of all those different kinds of experiences. I mean, that is something I would assume you would recommend in the way you're describing it because of all the different, uh, I guess, relationships you had that you would never have at Dartmouth. I'm making that
Right.
assumption, right? And
Yes. Yeah. I would recommend it. I will say in the moment when you're, 19, 20 years old, it's not really intentional. I took the AmeriCorps job because I didn't want to go home and live with my parents for the winter, and I had no other options.
well, I get that. Most most 19-year-olds don't want to do that, but they
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
they might
Yeah,
not
but
go to Biloxi. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, and you know what? Like I never even thought of it honestly when I was 20. And in the chaos of your 20s, you're not really thinking like, oh, like, that is a very stark contrast to what you're used to. I mean, I can remember it that clearly. Like I was checking my email in the dining hall, and there was a flyer for AmeriCorps. And I just saw it and I said, Biloxi, that seems interesting. And I just did it. But I didn't even think about, I didn't really even think about anything until I was there, which I don't know if I would recommend that, but
Uh,
but it
You would
ended up being
recommend thinking it through, maybe being a little more
yes.
cautious about
Yeah,
what's your
yeah, yeah.
choice. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you got there and you stayed there and took a brief, I guess, what was it? A timeout from Dartmouth for what, a year and a half? Is that what you said?
So I spent full time 3 years and then, oh, sorry, 3 months. And then I came back for a spring term and then I came back for the summer. And then after summer, I kept on going back. Um, because I was dating someone down there and we had dated for 6 years.
Well, that was a good reason to stay. I mean,
Yeah, that too. Again,
that is one of the reasons 19-year-olds do stay in one place. I
exactly.
think that's really honest. Yeah. Uh,
Like
so,
I said, I don't know how intentional any of this was.
okay. But it worked out
It did.
Great. Yeah, right. You wrote this novel. I mean, it's incredible. So do we want to get more into the characters? I mean, I don't want to give away the whole story, obviously. We want people to just have a taste of what you've written. So I don't know how far we want to go with
Oh,
it. Yeah.
sure. Yeah, no, that'll be, I love talking about characters.
Okay, let's do that then. Okay, so let's maybe get more delve into more of the characters and what went on between these two women, because as I think I said in the intro, the one of the Faith began to feel that her relationship with Kayla was changing
Mhm.
and stuff was different and it was murkier and maybe not so much on the up and up. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that Faith is, she's a follower. That's her flaw, is that she tends to be drawn into the orbit of more charismatic figures. And she grew up with Kayla, and she was kind of used to being in Kayla's shadow, because she ghost wrote Kayla's Instagram account. They had this dual Instagram persona called Hannah Primrose, and Faith was the ghostwriter. But she also had this secret yearning to step outside of Kayla's shadow. And, I think that most people can relate. Friendships have like this stasis. And when that stasis is disrupted, whether that's through a major life event or something else, things get kind of tense for a while. And that is, kind of an understatement of what happens. But when Faith goes to college and essentially leaves Kayla behind in their small town, it really creates this rupture in their friendship. Um, and at Harkness, Faith thinks that all of a sudden she's going to be, not a follower, but really, like, Kayla is kind of the pattern that she pursues, with the rest of her relationships, even in college. And so when Kayla shows up at her doorstep, Faith is drawn back into her orbit, and now I think we're going into spoiler territory, so I will
Okay.
stop there.
Okay, you can stop there. Well, let's just talk about maybe generally speaking, relationships do change, and women tend, I think, I will say this, women tend to have, your best friend, your best girlfriend, maybe more so than men. That's, I know, stereotyping, but still, and those do change, and how you navigate that, which is what you're talking about in this story, I think happens through all, I'm at the baby boomer end of this, and relationships that you've had for a long time begin to change. And how are you going to navigate these relationships that have, been very close to someone?
Mhm.
Um, Not easy to do. Um,
No, no. I think that, female friendship was obviously something I really had in mind when I was writing this book. And one thing I noticed in my own friendships is that you can be best friends with someone and you can even want the same things, whether that's love, respect, security, but you can have very different ideas of how to get that. And if you disagree on that, even that disagreement in and of itself can create a tension in the friendship. And so, Faith and Kayla, they both want to get out of their small town, but they have very different ideas of how to do that. And Faith is, I'm going to be a good student. I'm going to get into an Ivy League school. And Kayla's like, that all to me is all rigged for people like us. And I think that, we need to just really focus on, creating content and becoming influencers. And I think that disagreement is really fundamentally what starts that wedge that gets wider and wider and wider as the book progresses. And it's something that, I have felt in my own friendships. And it's something, the older I get, the more I'm reflective of that.
and the older you get, maybe everything gets more complex. There's
Yes.
there are more things at stake. Um, So, yeah, female friendships. We only have a couple minutes left. So, give us a website or give us platforms we can go to so we can uh, get more information about the book,
Yeah.
about you, about your work, about what you're doing, your next novel, whatever.
Sure. So, I'll Follow You is my debut novel. It's out today. You can find me on Instagram at Charlene Shuyi. That's Shiyyi. And you can also find me on my author website at www.charlenewangauthor.com.
Great. It was great talking to you today. Um,
So much
I guess,
fun.
yeah, the title of the book, I'll Follow You, will follow you. Charlene Wang, that's the author. I'll Follow You. And yeah, great book. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Joining me today is Stephanie Covington, PhD, LCSW. So she's a social worker as well as I am too. Her new book is Awakening Your Sexuality, a guide to connection and intimacy after addiction and trauma. Drawing from cutting edge research and decades of clinical experience, Stephanie Covington, PhD, and LCSW, goes beyond traditional recovery literature and considers sexuality an integral part of what it means to be whole and well. Addiction, trauma, and shame can shatter your experience of intimacy and sexual joy. But healing is possible. As Elizabeth Gilbert says in her foreword about Stephanie in the book, nobody is judged in these pages. Everyone is welcomed and everyone is understood, whether straight, queer, transgender, nonconforming, questioning, whatever you are, readers will discover inclusive and invaluable information. Educated at Columbia University and the Union Institute, Dr. Covington has served on the faculties of the University of Southern California, San Diego State, California School of Professional Psychology, and is a board-certified diplomat of the National Association of Social Workers and the American Board of Sexology. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kathryn.
We will get through the show. I know you're not feeling great, but you've got a lot of you're here.
Exactly.
That's the most important thing. You showed up. Okay, so sex is a difficult topic. It seemed to talk. We have difficulty, I think, as a culture talking about sex, just in general, even though it's all over the place and on the net and social media. But actually talking about it somehow, I think, and talking about it, intimacy and all of the things that you discuss in your book are still difficult for us to do as a society, I guess, right? So, but you're saying that women experience trauma, and then what happens is they become they traumatized, embarrassed, ashamed, and it affects their relationships with whomever, and they have the unfortunate. Many people turn to drugs, alcohol, and instead of being able to overcome it and have good relationships, good, satisfying, intimate relationships. Is that it?
Well, that's part of it.
That's over. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Well, you're absolutely right. We're a nation with sex all around us, and then lovers don't speak to each other. So there's quite a dichotomy. And in the treatment field, and you probably know this as a social worker, a lot of counselors and therapists are uncomfortable with the topic having to do with anything that's sexual. So we know that women and those who identify for women are at greater risk for abuse. We know that very often abuse and trauma are connected to addiction. But just even in general, think how many people who are not addicts, but who in their lives use alcohol or another drug in order to feel comfortable with anything sexual. It's used, it's connected to sex a lot, particularly the use of alcohol. So we have many people who go into recovery who've never had sex without the use of some kind of drug. And we have people who go into recovery with sexual issues, but nobody's talking about it. So it's a complicated topic.
Yeah, it is a complicated topic. And you talk about people who are supposed to be, or professionals who should be helping us navigate the trauma. And I'm thinking of physicians that, if you have a traumatic experience, that they will say, well, talk to your OB/GYN, talk to the doctor, talk to a nurse, I find that physicians have absolutely no ability to discuss intimacy or sex, and those questions are always omitted.
Yeah, I think particularly the medical profession it's been prepared to take care of our bodies sort of when there's a problem, but anything that has to do with sex is not something they're comfortable with. But even, as a social worker, thinking about your own training, that wasn't a topic that was focused on. And so that very often when people go to a counselor or a psychologist and they go to share a problem, if they get up the courage to share it, are met with kind of a hesitation or a shyness. It's just an uncomfortable topic. And so this is actually, I wrote on this topic over 30 years ago. And then there was a discussion about bringing the book out and making an updated version. I said, no, we need to start over. It's been 30 some years. I can't update a 30-year-old book on sex. It does not fit in today's world. And so, I have a co-author who's younger, who brings a more contemporary perspective, and we put our experiences and hopefully our wisdom together to create what I think is a very contemporary look at sexual issues in people's lives.
All right, let's talk about that, because you have the different generations, and you have a co-author who is younger. What are some of the differences? What's new in sex?
Well, yeah, what's new? Well, some things are the same.
Yeah.
Okay. Some things are the same. There's some basic things that are obviously quite the same. One thing is look at the difference in how we think about gender. 30 years ago, 35 years ago, we didn't say much about the trans non-binary population at all. Certainly, this group of people
Existed.
existed, but we didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
So we've expanded on that. We also have to look at the messages in our society, which still continue to be very contradictory. As we both have said already, there's sex all around us. I mean, think about the amount of pornography that's on the internet. 30 some years ago, you had to search for that. Today, you don't have to search at all. And so many young people are actually getting their sex education via the pornography on the internet. And that has created a whole wide range of difficulties, particularly for young people, thinking as to what people think, quote unquote, is what we would call normal, whatever that is. Um, we also, 30 some years ago, we certainly knew about trauma in people's lives, but we did not know the extent, for example, of sexual abuse. Um, it, it existed, but we certainly did not realize how prevalent it is. And, in today's world, we know one of the most dangerous places for a young woman to be is on an American college campus. Um, so all of those things are changes that we need to address. And when someone has had a form of sexual abuse or sexual assault, that can impact her in a whole variety of ways.
Is there a difference in who perpetrated the sexual assault? Let's talk about that. Let's say if it's a young girl and it's a family member, a father, an uncle, a brother, a sibling, or if it's a stranger and it's, obviously the age at which it happens is also, I assume, part of the picture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the age, the younger it happens, the more catastrophic it can be. When it's done by a family member or somebody that was close to you, which most abuse is how that occurs, not from strangers, it really impacts trust. And so it can be also more devastating. The more times it happens, if it's a one-time event versus over multiple years, all of those things can be impactful. And the important thing to understand is that healing is possible. I think what happens for many people who have this happen, there's this level of shame about, well, what did I do? Or uh, why me? Often we have people who try to tell someone and it's pushed aside and not acknowledged because the family doesn't want to acknowledge it, for example. There are just many barriers to getting help. And although help is possible, you just need to know kind of where to find it. So it's just one of those very complicated issues. So we have a fairly large number of young people who've been abused. They come into their adult lives, their sexuality, which we're born sexual beings, and then it develops over the course of our life, is now being impacted by something that has ruptured trust. Often people feel dirty. They don't feel good about their bodies. They dissociate. They close down. They become numb in their bodies. Sometimes they become numb psychologically. There are just so many things that can happen that disrupt when we think about intimacy and connection with sexual activity, certainly in adult life.
Yeah. So it affects you. First of all, I think it affects the choices that you make in terms of partners, whoever they are. Um, if you are feeling ashamed or afraid or are afraid of intimacy. Going back to young people who have been abused, because the cover up or the shame doesn't come obviously just from the person who's been attacked, a 6-year-old, a child living in a family, but the whole family is part of the cover up, right?
Yes,
It's
very often.
yeah, and even schools. So it's very difficult to. And how do you actually get to that that young person?
Well, very often we don't get to them when they're young. If the child tries to, well, number one, when someone's being harmed by someone they know, very often they've also been threatened. Don't you dare tell anyone, or I'll hurt you. And so there's that intimidation. Then let's say they risk telling, but the family doesn't want to believe it. So now it gets covered up. Now we have that same child now growing up into their adolescence, which means where we have developing sexuality is going to be very complicated in their adolescence. But let's say no one's talking about it. Now they learn, one of the things I know that's really helpful is if I use alcohol or another drug, I can kind of block myself out, and now I can be sexually active and not feel uncomfortable. So now we could have that same person now over the period of time using alcohol and other drugs, and now they have the risk of actually becoming addicted. Now, like, let's say they get into a treatment program that doesn't talk about sexual issues.
Is that the norm?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so now their chances of maintaining recovery have been somewhat limited now. Some people certainly do, but others struggle. They've struggled to really get into a long-term recovery. So there's just many ways this can play out. Um,
In your book, um, you have you have examples of personal stories
mhm.
and examples, and people can let's talk about some of those because that makes it real.
Sure. What Vanessa and I have done is we've created some composite stories um, of people that we have worked with. And so we wanted to have a variety of stories so people could find themselves. One of the stories in there you'll find is um, a young woman who is in a club as a dancer. She's also a sex worker. We have a woman who's, I would say, more middle class, married, um, having a lot of difficulty being sexual. So she and her husband are really no longer have much, if any, sexual activity. We just have a whole range of people. We have a professional woman who is a lesbian and what happens to her in terms of re-engaging, uh, understanding her pill addiction, and then having a new relationship in her 60s. So we've really tried to give people an idea of the range of things that people can struggle with over the course of recovery, but also healing their sexuality when there have been a lot of events that have been challenging.
What about the outcomes and healing? Well, take us through a process of healing. How, because as you say, it's very difficult, and even when
Yes, well,
yeah,
one of the things that's important, Kaz, is healing looks different for different people. Number one, I keep using, you and I we're talking about sexuality, and that's not even a word that we define very well, and we ask people to define it for themselves, but we think about it as an orientation, as a drive, is it's a biological process. It's really about who and how we are in the world. It's more than sexual activity. And if we're born sexual beings and that happens, it develops over the course of our life, and there are things that are impacting that, part of the healing process is going back and unpacking that and looking at what I call the inner self and the outer self. The inner self are thoughts, feelings, values, and beliefs. So having people explore their thoughts, their feelings, their values, and beliefs. What are the social messages that they have incorporated that may be falsehoods? Um, and beginning to look at who they are on the inside, and what are their values about sexuality, and then the outer self are our relationships and behaviors. So looking about growing up in your family of origin, it means understanding and thinking about your body. You have to be connected to your body in order to have a good sexual experience, and yet many people are disconnected. So there are many exercises to help people look at their inner self, their outer self, exercises that they can do to kind of see where they are in this process and choose how they want to be and where they want to be. So the recovery process is much clearer, if you will, from addiction, although there's certainly a lot of variety in that. But when we talk about healing one's sexuality, there's a lot of individual differences. What might be healing for me might be different than what's healing for you. So we've tried to give people a broad range of things to explore for themselves, both in the book and in the workbook, to help them do this work.
So there are, as you're describing it, it seems to me there are like two issues. We have to understand ourselves as sexual beings, explore it, our inner selves, our outer selves. It's different for each one of us. But the thing or the issue that I keep going back to is, who do we do it with? Yes, we need to read your book, but as you're saying, there aren't very many people out there, or any professionals out there, or self-help groups that will enable us to do this or help us to do this, even if we want to do it.
Well, I think sometimes we start alone and then we find a friend, we find our group. What we've seen over time in this having these conversations, is very often people have said, gee, I'm going to do this work, and say to a friend, let's do this workbook together. Because we piloted some of this earlier. And so you will find your group. And even if you think, oh, I'm doing alone, but I want some help from a therapist, you can take this material to a therapist and say, this is the work I want to be doing, and have a person help you do it. You and your therapist can work on it together. It's, I believe, I don't believe healing happens in isolation. Whether
It's impossible.
it's impossible.
Yeah.
That is a lonely, difficult, right? And so
Yes.
it's really important kind of to find your people. And you create your own group. A group is more than one. So you and a friend doing this together, a good friend, saying to, if you're a woman in recovery and you have a recovery group, saying, anybody in this recovery group want to work on this together? So there are a variety of ways to create support for yourself. I think what people are going to be very surprised is how many people are really interested in doing this, but just feel a little hesitant.
So you have to have a little bit of trust, which is also an issue. And to be able to trust somebody, to be able to connect with them in that way, right? And but you do, you're right. You do find your own group. You just
Yes, and you can choose which exercises you're going to share together. What level of vulnerability, the group can decide that. Let's do, for example, exercise X, Y, and Z. A number of years ago, several decades, in fact, I was running a small group for women who were early in recovery, and they decided they wanted to work on sexual issues. And one of the exercises I had them do, and which is actually included in the book and workbook, is they had charted their, it was a diagram, and they would plot out their sexual history. There was a +10 if it was positive, a -10 if it was negative, and then horizontally across the line there was life in 5-year increments. And so they would plot sexual experiences, positive and negative, and connect the dots. And then they would look at their alcohol and drug history. Again, they would plot that on the same graph, if you will. Positive experiences with alcohol and drugs, negative experiences, and that was a dotted line, but they connected all those dots. And then they talked about the interrelationship. So the women made those charts, and then that was part of group, was to share them. And everybody could share at the level that they wanted to share about these experiences that they had plotted out, but it helped them see the interrelationship between their alcohol and drug use and their sexual history. So there are a whole variety of exercises, and so many women said they had just never connected their alcohol and drug use with some of the sexual experiences they had had over the course of their lives.
When they say write it down, write a journal, it's sort of like that. put it in writing, and then it makes it real. And then,
Yes, and
yeah,
you can see it. I
yeah,
think, we carry so much internally, right? And once we sit and write it down or draw it or do a collage or express it in some kind of creative way, it it deepens the experience and it gives us new information about ourselves. It's the information we had, but when you see it, and you create it, it has a different meaning.
and you're doing it with people that support you, that you're connected with, as you say. So you have the support, and I would imagine in that kind of a situation, you would get most of the group talking. They'd be,
Oh,
yeah,
oh, the groups don't want to end.
they don't want it to end. Yeah,
No,
that's what it sounds
no,
like as you're
yeah,
describing it.
yeah, no, because the conversation has opened up all these things. People said, I haven't thought about this, or someone shares about an experience they had as a child, not getting any information about sex, and someone says, oh my God, it sounds like we had the same mother. There's so many pieces. And when sexual issues and sexual concerns have been sort of surrounded in ways by shame, by what it's like to grow up in certain families or to live in this society, to come together with people with the freedom to talk helps to open that up. It helps that shame to dissipate. It's when we look at sexuality, but focus on sexual activity, it's a very curious thing. It's something you're supposed to be good at, but you're not supposed to have seen anybody do it. I
Yeah.
mean, we just, we have, you're right. It's just so bizarre. The contradictions in our society around this.
Well, it's interesting. This is related to it in some way, but I was recently in Norway with my kids and grandchildren, and these kids are like 6, 7, and 8. And we went to a museum, and maybe you know of this museum. It's a children's museum, but they have a whole section on sexuality. That's
Hmm.
from starting. Kids can be anywhere from babies on up, and you
Mhm.
walk into this room and talking about making sex real, the first thing you see, and my guys were 6, 7, 8, is an actual depiction of the Kama Sutra. I mean,
Uh-huh.
you see the sexual act, penis, vagina, the whole thing. They giggled, they laughed, they walked by it. They had never seen that.
Right.
And then they have a gigantic uterus
Hmm.
that the kids can go into and play in it and simulate their birth.
Well, think about that.
How about that? I thought it was great. Yeah, go
That's
ahead.
fabulous. Now, think about putting that in the United States.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
I mean, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and we don't realize, particularly when we talk about women's bodies, the first complete anatomical diagram and understanding of the clitoris was in 2005.
Yeah.
2005. So, I mean, what can we say about that?
Well, you can
Because,
say a lot. Think about
yeah,
women's first sexual experiences with I call them young men, but boys. They don't know what a clitoris is or where it is
or why or
or
whatever.
why it is.
Exactly. And so we've been really slow, particularly in this country,
Yeah,
really having adequate information for people. I think it's wonderful that your grandkids got to experience that in Norway.
they did. And it's the first time I had seen, as you say, you don't see this in the United States. You see
No,
quite the opposite, right? We have
quite the opposite.
yeah, we have a cover up.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it was great. We don't have that much time left. I could keep going and there's a lot to talk about, right? We're just getting into it actually. So you got to go out and read your book, Awaken Your Sexuality, A Guide to Connection and Intimacy After Addiction and Trauma. It's been great talking to you today.
Well, thank you so much for
Yeah.
having me on your show. I appreciate it.
And but Stephanie, so websites or, other
Well, I have
platforms.
a website. It's just www.stephaniecovington.com. I'm on Instagram. We do trainings and webinars. You can look at our website. On the resource page, you'll even find there'll be a handout there that's checking in today on my sexuality, that you can do a self-assessment to kind of see where you are.
So when you do training programs, are they on Zoom, on air, webinars, or in person?
Well, we do training and we do training and things in person, but we also do Zoom. We do virtual.
Great,
So you
great,
can
great,
see a calendar of our events. That's on my website also.
good. Well, we need to keep talking.
Great.
Keep
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on the show. I think
Thank
it's a
you.
topic we need to all be talking more about.
I totally agree. I have to have you on another time to continue our conversation.
Would love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Bye.